Welcome everyone. I just wanted to start by saying this presentation will actually cover a whole lot of data and a whole lot of numbers. And I just want to acknowledge in the very beginning that all of those are actually individuals. So they're people who have personally been impacted, lost their lives, been seriously injured, their families, communities, motorcycle groups have all been impacted and affected by these massive numbers that we'll see throughout this presentation. And I just wanted to acknowledge in the very beginning that this is a very human sort of impact that it's having in our community, and reflect on that as we go through the information. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present, acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And from a road safety perspective, in particular, note that in the last 5 years, there were 28 Aboriginal motorcycle riders who were killed on our roads, and more than 800 Aboriginal people in New South Wales who were hospitalised. Aboriginal people in general, and in those statistics, actually are twice as likely to be affected by road trauma in New South Wales compared to the general population. And it's really important that we focus as well specifically on working with community to reduce that trauma that they experience in their community as well. And certainly we're committed to that as part of our Road Safety Action Plan. So as an overview, over the last 5 years, you can see there that 5,116 people were either killed or seriously injured on New South Wales roads as motorcyclists, at a cost to the community of $5.5 billion. As you'll hear throughout today, about 285 of those were motorcycle deaths. And so the enormity of those numbers clearly should motivate us to continue to look for today those solutions and those things that we can do to reduce that impact on the community in New South Wales. And so why are we here specifically today? Well, as a result of the increase in the deaths last year, from 50 fatalities in 2023 to 68, so 18 additional deaths. And last year, up until September, 2,938 people admitted to hospital in New South Wales, like a significant increase in the trauma. And over time, and you'll see in this presentation, we have been successful in reducing over time overall deaths, but also motorcycle deaths and serious injuries. But this increase clearly marks a point at which we really need to come together to actually redouble our efforts in terms of reducing the trauma for motorcycle riders in New South Wales. Overall, when we have a look at the data in relation to motorcycle riders, and we know that, we've said that motorcycle riders are overrepresented in our trauma, but when you look at drivers, so you can see that yellow line, this is the rate per 10,000 vehicle registrations of fatality rates for riders and drivers. And you can see that there's an increase, and I think Sean might have a similar graph to this one as well. But in relation to drivers, because motor vehicles actually do have and had significant increases in the safety attributes of vehicles that people are travelling in, and we've seen that have a real impact on the reduction of trauma on our roads, motorcycle riders are more vulnerable, and the rate at which they're being killed and seriously injured is significantly higher than those who are travelling in vehicles. And over the last 20 years, as you can see, there has been a significant reduction. When we look at that in terms of motorcycle riders and the involvement in casualty crashes at the rate of the licence holders in New South Wales, you can see here that, there are significant peaks as motorcycle riders go through their riding experience. And that in their L's clearly are significant. And in fact, I'd say motorcycle riders on their L's are the most vulnerable to casualty crashes of any road user that we have on the network during that period on their L's. And then we see it spike again in P's and spike again in their greens, and also, still spike when they transition to full licences. But we should also not be sort of confused about this being a young rider problem, and so this is only about young riders. When we have a look at the age distribution of fatalities in New South Wales over that 5-year period, Yep, 16 to 25-year-olds overrepresented at 22%. But 26 to 35-year-olds, 17%, 36 to 45, 16, 46 to 55, 18, and over 55s, 27% of the fatalities. And so we need to tackle this problem not just as a young rider issue, we need to tackle this problem as well right across the board in terms of all rider experience on our roads. And I just, again, in terms of, we're talking today specifically about the novice rider and the graduated licensing system that we have. Now, this is a graph of the novice driver involvement in casualty crashes. And unlike the rider for motorcyclists, your L's when you're learning to drive a car is actually the safest time that anybody will ever be negotiating driving on our network in terms of the level of trauma. And we know what we've seen since the introduction of the graduated licensing system for drivers is a halving of the actual trauma associated with drivers in those novice drivers. So we've halved the number of people and the involvement of young drivers in fatal crashes, but also across casualty crashes. And again, just to reinforce, this is the profile that we see for motorcycle riders. And so, today in your discussions about the graduated licensing system, clearly we need to be focusing on what more can we do to make it safer for these people who are coming onto their Ls for the first time when we see this significant peak in trauma for motorcycle riders. One of the other key aspects of the trauma that we see in terms of novice rider fatalities is by urbanisation. And motorcycle fatalities, this is a 5-year period. We can see last year, that 2023 to 2024, for novice riders, there was an increase of 55% in fatalities amongst novice riders. So not just that 18 additional deaths for the 68 people who lost their lives on the road, but a significant increase for novice riders as well. 77% of novice rider fatalities are in metro and country urban areas. So the urban context is a really important focus for safety for motorcycle riders. And whilst we do have, deaths that are happening on high-speed country roads, we also see here that we need to potentially refocus our efforts around the interactions with other vehicles, but also the engagement of new riders, and they're not all young new riders, there's old new riders as well. I got my Ls last year. So we need to be focused across all age groups here as well. So when we then have a look at the total fatality, so that was novice, so we can see a shift in the proportion of country-urban fatality crashes for motorcycle riders, a slight increase, but still 74% of those fatalities occurring in metro and country-urban areas across New South Wales. What I'd say here as well, and whilst we do want to focus on all road users and the involvement of other counterpart vehicles in crashes involved with motorcycle riders, 43% of those fatalities are single vehicle crashes. Now, we do as well need to see and tackle the issue of individual responsibility in our roadcraft and riding motorcycles as well as having a look at the interactions of all vehicles on the roads and the risks associated with motorcycle riders interacting with other vehicles on our network. And what I just focus as well on, because when we're talking about particularly the behaviours on our road, but also the types of crashes. So these are the top 5 crashes shown in our data in terms of the movements that people are involved in when they have a crash. And so you can see the top one there is a runoff path on a curve crash is the number 1 crash. And you can see significantly higher in the country area than the metropolitan area. And then off path on a straight crash involving a motorcycle. And then when we come down to the vehicle from same direction, So that's usually a rear end or a side swipe crash. And you can see significantly that in urban areas and in the metropolitan area, significant increase in the crash types for that rear end and side swipe crash. In the next one down, the vehicle in the opposing direction, which clearly is a head-on. So, the reality is that's the next highest level of crash that we have on the network. And the fifth one is the vehicle adjacent. So that vehicle adjacent is where two vehicles are at an intersection. So very intersection crashes, essentially. So all this data is available for us to actually interrogate the circumstances of all of the crashes that involve motorcycle riders. But these are the top 5 types of crashes that are occurring on our network, impacting on motorcycle riders. And when we have a look at the behavioural factors, so 57% of fatal crashes have the involvement of speed, so excessive speed, whether it's either speeding or it's travelling too fast for the conditions that you're driving in, and 30% of our serious injury crashes. The overall speed involvement in fatal crashes across the network is 40%. And so, motorcycle riders, it's a much higher level of involvement of speed in the crashes that they're involved in, leading to fatal crashes. About 25% for serious injuries. And so similarly, it's, again, a higher proportion of the motorcycle crashes which actually are involving speed. And looking over the comparison with illicit drugs as a factor, it's about the same for motorcycle riders as it is for other road users. Alcohol and fatigue, though, as factors, are actually lower than the other crashes that are occurring on our network involving other vehicles. I think it probably resonates with people. Motorcycle riders are much more wary about going for a ride and having consumed alcohol in a way that actually impairs their ability to ride their bike. And so we see less of that happening compared to other motorists. And motorcycle riders, as you've heard, are actually overrepresented in our either kilometres travelled. Their fatality rate is 24 times higher by licence, by registration, like on all factors. And so we really do need to focus in on those things that we can do collectively to actually address this issue. I'd also just finally say, like, motorcycle helmet wearing, although low in terms of a contributing factor to fatalities and serious injuries, at 7%, it's still too high. And that is an area where we probably do need to be looking more seriously at what we can do. In terms of serious injuries, showed that chart right up front of the last 5 years, of that $5.5 billion cost. The majority of that cost, the largest proportion of it, is actually serious injury crashes, because we're seeing 12,951 people admitted to hospital over the last 5 years. And that impact on our hospital system is real, but the impact on the individuals, and Heidi's story is a salutary lesson in sort of the impact that it has on an individual, let alone that when you expand that out to 12,951 individuals. And what we do know, Liz Therome's in the room here today with us as well, but the research that she undertook, and which has spurred on the creation of the MotorCap program and the rating of protective gear, and we've already heard the value of even things like wearing protective gloves. That whilst we have no requirements for riders to wear protective clothing in New South Wales, that study in 2011 did show that if we're wearing protective jackets, it's a 21% reduction in hospitalisation for those types of crashes. Gloves is 59% and pants is 51%. Like, we could see a significant reduction in the impact on individuals suffering serious injuries if we were able to lift the rate of people who are wearing protective gear. And dare I say, if we had protective gear, all the gear all the time when we ride, that we would see a significant reduction in trauma on our roads and the impact that that's having on first responders, but also those who are working in our hospital system. Today you're going to be talking about, and we'll have sessions which really will cover the whole of a safe system. And that safe system really is the benchmark for an integrated approach and coordinated approach which delivers effective reductions in trauma and in a proven way over the last 4 decades. And so we're looking in the room for all of you to play a really positive role in contributing your ideas across all of the aspects of the safe system in order to reduce the trauma on our roads. And I'd just like to finish by saying on a more positive note, having seen this sort of increase that we've seen in trauma, although we've seen a decline over the years. 8 out of the last 10 years in New South Wales has seen the lowest number of fatalities in New South Wales on record. New South Wales has achieved the lowest rate of fatalities compared to any other state or jurisdiction in Australia. If we had the same rate as the late 70s or early 80s, there would have been more than 2,200 deaths on our roads last year, not 340. The things that we've done as a community, as a legislature, as organisations like the Advocates for Motorcycle Safety have actually worked. And so it's really important that we also have this positive sort of approach to the things that we can do that will continue to drive down the level of trauma on our roads. Because our goal is to eliminate, get to zero, because there's a recognition that these deaths and serious injury, these crashes that are happening are preventable. And so really important for us to maintain that focus. We have actually achieved great outcomes in the past, collaborating together, campaigns, education, enforcement processes, legislation, standards for motorcycles and motorcycle gear, safer roads for people to ride on. They're all really key elements to continuing to drive down the trauma on our roads. Thank you.